So I'll admit, I'm guilty of binging on Netflix for hours on end. Who's with me on that one? So our next speaker, Mary Ramsey, is going to talk about the golden age of television and her two favorite shows and why they are important to her. Give it up for Mary Ramsey.
All right. Hi, everyone. As been said, my name is Mary Ramsey, and Hi, Drew Robinson. And I'm a senior here at Princess Anne. And to start off my presentation, does anyone know who this woman is? Yes, people in my age group probably don't. So as a point of reference, you know how we like to joke that Lady Gaga is Madonna, not that Madonna's not Madonna anymore? Blondie was Madonna before Madonna was Madonna. She was a very popular singer in the 70s and 80s. And one day this past summer, I was riding around with my dad, and he was listening to what we like to call an oldies station. And a Blondie song came on. And he remarked, it being a song from his childhood, that everything he needed to know in life, he could learn from a Blondie song. And it got me thinking about the fact that famous music groups like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and Janis Joplin really define what people think of when they think of my parents' generation and the generation of a lot of my peers' parents. And from that thought, it kind of got me thinking about what my kids and my friends' kids will think of when they think about my generation's childhood. And it really made me realize the fact that when people will look back on kind of what defined millennials in their teenage years, it's a lot of super popular television shows that have really come to kind of define our pop culture and the pop culture of our age period. And it made me realize that, to paraphrase my dad, everything I need to know in life, I learned from two television series. So I'm going to start off by talking about two of my favorite shows, those two shows that have taught me so much, and how they've shaped me as an individual and what they mean to me, and then kind of talk about why that matters beyond just my own little life. So the first show that really has had an impact on me is The West Wing, which started in 1999 and ran through 2006 on NBC. It was created by Aaron Sorkin, who's arguably one of the most famous screenwriters and television creators of the late 20th century and early 21st century. A lot of times when you think of a television show, you don't probably know the name of the person that actually had the idea for the show and that wrote the episodes, but Aaron Sorkin's one of those people when you often do. And I wanted to share one of my absolute favorite quotes from the series, which is, "Never doubt the ability of a small but determined group of citizens to change the world. It's the only thing that ever has." And this quote kind of epitomizes what this show is about. It covers a fictional presidency in the White House and the senior staff that works in the part of the White House known as the West Wing, where the title comes from, and their journey from first being elected and being these kind of, very new to running a country, and this very optimistic, and it takes them through a re-election and scandals and party changes and all kinds of interesting things. And so I started watching this show live around its last season. My parents were both people that were really into politics, so they really liked the show. And at that point, I was late elementary school, early middle school, and I could kind of start to understand what was going on. And I just absolutely fell in love and ended up going back and watching all of the seasons. And these are just some of my personal favorite moments from throughout the 7 seasons. And looking back on this time period, watching this show, especially like my middle school, early high school days, I can really see how these very, comical ideas have kind of shaped me, and the fact that the characters in the show use a whole lot of sarcasm, as you can see on this slide, and that I tend to do that in my speech patterns today. And the fact that the characters maintain the kind of optimism that's epitomized by the quote I shared before when it comes to politics, and how I kind of do that too. And just a general love of politics and the idea that government can be a really good thing, that does a lot of really good things for the people that run it. And the fact that government is something that's built by the people and that people have the power to change. And so looking back on my viewing of this show, I really see how the writing and the ideas it puts forth have really come to shape me as an individual and how I kind of view the world of politics, which is something I plan to enter professionally as I go into college and study journalism and political science. And the second show that really shaped me was Gilmore Girls, which started around the same time period in the early 2000s and ran for, again, 7 years. And it's something that I started watching very early on in my life, in my elementary school days, and was just my favorite thing. I can remember very fondly coming home from Little League soccer practice and just having to rush through my little bits of elementary school homework just to be able to sit down and watch the show. And one of the amazing things about Gilmore Girls, it's actually, and very sadly, super rare when it comes to television, is that it's a show about females written and created by a female, a woman named Amy Sherman Palladino, who's a very successful television creator and writer who created the show and co-produced it with her husband. So it really helped me to see the show is about a mother and a daughter, a woman played by Lauren Graham, Lorelai, who had a daughter when she was 16 and ran away from home to raise the daughter. She had a lot of issues with her parents and her parents' lifestyle. She came from a very privileged family and kind of wanted to reject those ideas and raise her daughter her own way. Fast forward 16 years, and the daughter is now a teenager, and she is raising the daughter in a small, very idyllic town called Stars Hollow in Connecticut. And the show chronicles their mother-daughter relationship, which they have a very close relationship, they're very good friends, as well as their relationships with their female friends as they progress through Lorelai starting her own business and her daughter Rory going through an elite high school and then going to Yale for college. And again, just some of my personal favorite gems from throughout the series. And again, like I said, something that was really important for me was, with regard to this show, was the idea that it not only displayed things that I could connect with, because it was things about growing up as a young woman, and as a young woman who was kind of outside of the conventional mold. I was never popular in school. I was always kind of nerdy, kind of shy and bookish, which was very much how the daughter Rory was described. So the character really spoke to me from a very young age and kind of helped me to see that just because you're not, in the in crowd and you're not you don't act how everyone else is acting, doesn't mean that that's a bad thing, and that you can still be a really cool person who other people want to be around. And also, it really helped me to see the importance of kind of a parent relationship. My parents got divorced when I was very young, so I was going back and forth between my mom and my dad, and I ended up becoming very close friends with both of them and having very meaningful relationships with both of my parents. And so it was very cool for me to see that that's not necessarily a weird thing, just because it's not what everyone else has in their lives, that it can be a really cool thing and a really great way to learn from your parents and to grow as an individual. So I just spent a few minutes talking to you about why these two shows mean a lot to me and how they've impacted me. But this is something that has a lot deeper meaning in this as well. Is that better? Okay, sorry about that. So a recent study by the Child Health Institute on the impact of television on young people especially found that the average American is watching about 5 hours of television a day, which doesn't necessarily sound like a lot, but if you multiply that by 365 days a year, you'll find that the average American is watching almost 2,000 hours of television per year, which is a whole lot, and kind of shows how in this day and age, how two shows could have come to impact me, a millennial, so much. And it may even force us into this idea that we feel like, oh, now we have to cut off television a lot, and we need to limit our children's exposure at a very young age. But the same study by the Child Health Institute also claims and discusses the idea that television can be very, very good for young children, and that it can expose them to a lot of issues and ideas that they wouldn't necessarily be exposed to in their daily lives. Many children, especially in a developed country like the US, you don't have to deal with things like homelessness and substance abuse and a whole host of other issues related to government repression or things like that in their daily lives, which is great. But that doesn't mean those things aren't happening in the world and that they're not super important, which is where television can come in, and it can expose a young person to the idea that there are great complexities to things like the war on drugs with shows like The Wire, and even the two shows that I grew up on, The West Wing and Gilmore Girls, the idea of how government works and that you can bring some optimism into government, and that being involved in your is important. Or with Gilmore Girls, the idea that just because you don't fit the conventional mold doesn't mean you can't excel in life, and the importance of those interpersonal relationships, especially with regard to women having strong interpersonal relationships with other women. So again, it's not necessarily the idea that just because we're watching television a whole lot more now doesn't necessarily mean that we need to cut back. And indeed, the Writers Guild of America, which is an organization of screenwriters and television producers and creators throughout the U.S., compiled a list a couple years back called the 101 Best Written Television Series of All Time, which is very helpful if you're looking for some things to add to your Netflix queue. But one super interesting thing about the list is that about 50% of the 101 series listed are either currently on the air or have run in the last 10 years or so, around the last decade, which kind of brings about this idea that we are sort of living in a renaissance of television. Television has become such a staple, but if you think about it, television wasn't really something, the idea of a television in every home didn't come about until the 50s, 60s, post-World War II era. It's still a relatively new area in the grand scheme of human existence and art. And this idea that we have reached this point where we've learned how to do it really, really well. And we have these amazing shows like The West Wing and Gilmore Girls, but also like The Wire and House of Cards, and hilarious comedies like Modern Family and Seinfeld that are just super iconic and have come to define us as a culture, but also can teach us and expose us to so many things in life. And this idea that we have all these platforms like Netflix and Amazon Prime that do make these programs so readily available to us on so many different devices, and that, yeah, you can sit down and binge watch, and maybe, just maybe, that means that you don't get around to that science project that may or may not be due Monday, whoops. But the idea that you can learn something from that series too, and paying attention and picking shows that do put forth really interesting and new ideas can help you to learn something from that experience and to get something out of it.